6:19 a.m. here in London. You're listening to The Globalist on Monocle 24 with me, Dominic Reynolds. I'm pleased to say I'm joined in the studio now by author and former head of news for Egypt's state television, Abdel Latif El-menawy, as well as the activist Sharif Allah and the journalist Rachel Shabi. We're going to discuss the situation, the big questions that have been raised in Egypt over the past couple of days and in the last few hours indeed. Thank you all for joining me this morning. Perhaps we should start by what on earth we call this situation so far. Sharif, perhaps I could start with you. I imagine I know what you would call it. You'd call it a revolution.
Yeah, I think, like, aside from focusing on what to call it, like, I would definitely call it a popular uprising. That is to be quite accurate, because you cannot judge whether it's a revolution or not until we see what happens at the end, not of the process itself. But definitely, this is not a typical military coup. This is not a coup d'etat. This is not the Bolivian or the Turkish or the Venezuelan scenario. It's a new thing, that it's a new model that would be, like, later events would be called after it. I think that the military wouldn't have moved an inch if an estimate of like 15, 20, 30 millions, it's aside from numbers, but almost everyone was on the streets, and the country was at the edge of unprecedented domestic, or civil violence, that the army had to intervene.
Abdel Latif, the army had to intervene?
Yes. If they didn't do that, I think all the Egyptians will just feel upset. Not just upset; they will just feel that they have been betrayed. Again, you can call it anything, but not a coup. And this is the big mistake, I believe, that the whole Western media and the whole Western government, they are just falling in this mistake. It's not a coup. This is the national army. And they cannot just turn blind for the call from the nation. When you see, as Sharif said a few seconds ago, millions in the streets asking the army to step down, to come, not just to save them from a future, uncertain future. The future, they don't know where they are going to. They are changing. The Muslim Brotherhood were trying to change. As one of my friends explained, they are trying. He is someone. He has nothing. No one catch him talking in politics. He told me that they are trying to change my face. This is my feeling. This is why I just went to the street. So again, this is the nation. Stand up to save their future, to save their country, and the other people. It's not as they tried to show it at the beginning. It's equally divided society. No, it was a group against the nation. This is the situation. And when you ask the army, where are you going to stand, with a group or with the nation?
Simple choice then, Rachel Shabi. You were nodding.
I'm not sure it's that simple, actually. I think what you call it depends on who you are. Obviously, there's a huge component of it being the will of the people. Nobody, not even the opposition who organized it, expected the June 30 protest to be so huge, that there was so much opposition to President Morsi that he squandered away all the goodwill that people put in the democratic process of electing him in just 1 year. So to a certain extent, yes, the army is responding to the call of the people on the street to get rid of a disastrous leader. But for the people who support him, it will be seen as a coup, because whatever the will of the people on the streets, he has actually been removed by force by the army. So, and I think that is the trouble in Egypt today, that there is now a percentage of the population that is sizable. It's not an insignificant percentage that will be feeling embittered and will be feeling like their voice and their vote has been stolen from them.
Embitteredness, and presumably a lot of confusion with the process as well. This is a nation a year into its sort of democratic journey, and this very dramatic turn of events has taken place. And I wonder what it means for the integrity of this sort of new democracy, for what sort of precedent it sets that this sort of trouble has happened and the military has stepped in.
I mean, that's exactly the problem, that has it now set the precedent that every time the population isn't happy with a democratically elected leader, they can just call on the army to get rid of him? And the other component to this is that, of course, the Egyptian army is part of the population. It is conscripted, so people feel very affiliated to it and feel that it is acting in the interests of the Egyptian people. But at the same time, the army is really only interested in itself. It has its own strategic concerns. It has its own huge economic concerns.
It's taking obviously $1 billion from the US, and it wants stability as well.
It's taking $1 billion from the US. But not only that, it actually owns a lot of Egypt's economy. So it has a vested interest in stability and looking after its own interests. Now, that's the reason it stepped in. It's not necessarily that it stepped in thinking, well, the people have spoken, we need to respond. It has its own concerns and its own agenda. And given the record of 15 months of army rule following the revolution before the democratic elections took place, it was hated at that point. So given its track record, it's slightly surprising to see the pro-revolution protesters embracing army rule right now.
I think. Let me just disagree with what you said about the army. They are not different identity. They are part of the society. They are part of, and if you are talking about the interest of the army, it's not personal interest. I'm not with the idea of having your own interest as an institution separately than the other societies.
Well, I suppose we can.
But again, we should deal with. I'm Egyptian. I served in the army for a year or something, like most of the Egyptian at the time until now, and I have relation. I have my cousin, I have my uncle who served in the army. They participate in wars. I have some people died in wars. I mean, the army is part of our proud. It's not some. And this 18 months when they ruled the country, they had a lot of mistakes, and I would say they were part of the bad things in the old regime.
Clearly, there were a lot of problems. How do we avoid those bad things being repeated, Sharif?
Well, I think that just a point to comment on, speaking of the army's interests, the army, I believe that it does not want to blatantly be in power because it has lost more than it gained during the power at which, the time at which it was in power. It wants to secure its interests without taking the blame for what is going on, because Egypt will definitely be going through a lot of troughs and bad points for the coming several years, and the army does not want to lose its credibility for this. That's one point. Another thing is we have to know who has the upper hand. Is it the army or the people right now? I think it's the people, it's not the army. Having 22 million signatures of rebel, having millions of protesters in the street, it's definitely the people who have the upper hand. How to prevent this? First of all, we should introduce democracy into ballot boxes. That's part of the democratic practice. However, it shouldn't be the only thing. Democracy is also about a contract between the voter and the candidates. So Morsi vowed that he's going to respect certain constitutional document that he was elected upon which he respected. He vowed and promised to do certain reforms. He did none of them, and then he abolished this constitutional document, issued an unprecedented authoritarian document, giving himself unchecked powers.
And we saw everything seemed to flow from those events sort of back in November. That sort of power grab.
Yeah.
How does the next person, whoever it may be, and we won't talk about the candidates at this point, I don't think, perhaps we don't have time, how do those mistakes end up not being repeated?
National consensus, I would say. Like all parties have to be integrated. Nobody should be blinded by power anymore. Nobody should say like, oh, yeah, if a secular president comes, they shouldn't exclude the Islamists as well. But there has to be a genuine national dialogue. There should be truth and reconciliation. That's what we asked for after the first wave of revolution. It shouldn't be about revenge only. It should be like truth and reconciliation. Let's see who did what and let's build upon which.
And that makes it sound so easy, truth and reconciliation. But this is a country divided, isn't it? I mean, we saw the rural and the urban divide was presumably behind so much of the problems that the country's seen in the last year. How do we reach those points of unity and some sort of consensus that you've been suggesting, Rachel?
The problem with that view is that it's absolutely right to say that we need, truth and reconciliation and consensus. But the problem with that is, of course, that, the army already has acted absolutely in contradiction to what those aims are. I mean, already we've seen Islamist channels being shut down. We've seen various members of the Muslim Brotherhood allegedly charged. So what we're seeing is exactly what we don't want to happen, which is the criminalization of the Muslim Brotherhood as an organization. Now, that is not the way to bring them into the fold, and I would say that it is impossible to move forward without having the Muslim Brotherhood involved in some way. They are a major part of Egyptian society, and whatever their mistakes, they do need to be included.
What I can confirm, this is the intention, and this is what they tried to do. They asked Al-Hurriya wal-Adala party to participate in the dialogue last night, yesterday, and they refused. And when General Sisi had behind him one of the leaders of the Islamists, this is another message for people. I mean, Egypt will not be able to just go forward without having a sort of unity between all the parties. The problem with Muslim Brotherhood that they were just trying to take over, to take everything, to take power. They exclude everyone. They want to just to contain all the power, no one else beside them. And this is the big mistake. The Muslim Brotherhood, the mistake that they had a sort of other goals over. It's past the nation. It's something international, something regarding the Islamist nation, but not. They didn't talk. They were not interested in Egypt, but as a part of the bigger idea, bigger dream they have. This is the big mistake. Muslim Brotherhood, they have to try to integrate with the system, with the society, with the nation. They are not the chosen from God to be the only Islam, the only Islamist, the only good people, and the others, they just go to rubbish.
Well, we'll see who does the choosing. I'm afraid we haven't got any more time for this, but thank you so much, people, for joining us this morning. Abdel Latif El-Mawani, Sharif Allah, Rachel Shabi, thank you all very much. You're listening to The Globe.